When I was a kid growing up in a very small town in the 80s and 90s, my parents often left me and my little sister home alone for a few hours at a time to run errands. My mom had two brothers, and we lived in the same town as one of her brothers and his family. Being a close-knit family, my cousins and I were always over at each other's houses. The adults would leave us alone a lot. Back then, it was standard to tell kids, don't open the doors for anybody and don't use the stove, and we never thought anything about it. After my parents divorced, it happened more often as both my parents worked different shifts at their jobs. My sister and I lived in town, and my cousins and my grandma lived outside of town with only a few neighbors nearby, so my sister and I got the best of both worlds, city kids and country kids. Because we lived in such a small community, everyone knew everyone else, and I think we all felt perfectly safe that nothing bad would ever happen, and if it did, our neighbors would help us. Around the time I was 8 or 9 years old, I began to get strange phone calls. It would be a man's voice on the phone, and these calls would almost always come when I was home alone. This person would tell me that they could see me, that they knew I was alone, and that they were coming to get me. When I'd get these calls, I'd usually just hang up without saying anything. Of course, it terrified me, but I was too scared to tell my parents. I was scared by the calls, but I also liked getting to stay home alone. Being left to take care of my sister made me feel grown, and I didn't want my parents to stop leaving me in charge. Stupidly, I kept the calls to myself. One day, while my dad was at work, my cousin, who was a year older than me, was at my house. We were watching TV and playing when the phone rang. She answered it, and her face went pale. She hung up and started crying. I immediately asked her what was wrong, and she shook her head, saying, "I can't tell you." I pressed, and she finally told me about how this man would call her a lot when she was home alone, always telling her he knew she was by herself and he was going to come get her. I was shocked. I explained that I had been getting the same calls, and we immediately agreed that it had to be one of her older brothers or their friends playing a mean joke on us. We calmed down and kinda laughed it off. I didn't get another call for a while after that, so I almost forgot about it. In the summer between my 6th and 7th grade year, my grandma had taken a part-time job, and my mom lived in another town, so my sister and I were home alone almost every day while my dad worked. We spent our days outside playing in the yard, riding bikes around the neighborhood, and tanning in our backyard a lot. One day, my sister was gone to a friend's, and my cousin was back at my house. We were listening to music and dancing around the living room when the phone rang. I picked it up, and there it was, the voice. At this point, I was 12 years old, and I had developed a little bit of an attitude. When the man told me he knew we were home alone, I laughed and said, "Liar." He waited a moment and said, "I can prove that I know you're alone." I laughed again, a little more nervously this time, and said, "Oh yeah? Then do it." His response was, "I love that little yellow tank top you're wearing today." By this time, my cousin had turned off the music and was watching me, so she saw when the color drained out of my face. I was freaking out. I had just gotten a new outfit and was wearing it, a yellow tank top and jean shorts with matching yellow and pink patches. I yelled, "Leave us alone!" and slammed the phone down, my heart racing. I started crying and told my cousin, "It was him. He knows we're here by ourselves." I ran over to shut the living room curtains, and my cousin said, "I think we should call somebody." I agreed, but instead of calling the police, she picked up the phone and tried to call her mom at work. We got no answer. I called my dad's work and left a message with the gate guard to have him call me. As we were debating what to do next, I heard the gravel in our driveway crunch under the wheels of a vehicle. I ran to the window and peeked outside to see a small red car sitting in the driveway. I didn't recognize the car, and I didn't recognize the man and woman inside it. In our tiny little town, even if I didn't know someone's name, I'd surely know their face, but I didn't know either one of them. I froze with fear as I watched them talking to each other, and my cousin ran to lock the back door. We had no weapons and no real way to try to defend ourselves other than my softball bat, which was outside on the carport. As my cousin came back into the room, she hissed, "We have to hide." My cousin hid in a small space between a tall bookshelf and the wall, and I threw myself behind our recliner, which faced the window. I watched in horror as the woman walked up to the front door. Instead of knocking, she tried the knob. I tried to quiet my breathing, convinced she might be able to hear me, and watched her shadow through the curtains as she walked around to our carport. Sure enough, I heard the doorknob jiggle. There was a pause, and then the door shook as if someone was trying to force it open. I covered my mouth and forced myself not to scream. After what felt like an eternity, the sounds stopped and everything went quiet. I was too afraid to move, so I just waited. I have no idea how much time passed, but eventually we heard the car backing out of the driveway. Once I got the courage, I ran to peek out the window again to make sure they really had left. I saw no trace of the red car, but I was still racked with fear. I told my cousin she could come out, and we hugged each other in relief. Even though we were scared to go outside, we decided to get on our bikes and ride to the office my aunt worked in. Once we were there, we told her everything, the phone calls and how long they'd been happening, the red car and the description of both people inside. She immediately called the police, and we had to give our statements about it all. When my dad got home from work, he asked me why I'd called the gate guard, and my aunt filled him in on everything, and from that moment on, we weren't allowed to stay by ourselves again until I was probably 16. We never heard anything else on the case, and we also never got any more phone calls again. It's been years, and I still think about the situation often. We never found out who made those calls or who those people in the red car were. The phone calls could have just been some mean prank, and those people could have just been trying to simply rob the house or something, but the coincidence that day was crazy. I have no idea if the man kept watching us as we grew up, but the whole thing definitely made me paranoid about a lot of things, and I always make sure to keep a weapon near me at all times when home alone. Now a single mom, I am forced to leave my kids alone occasionally, and I am overly protective with them, giving tons of instructions and rules about what they can and can't do. They may roll their eyes at me, but I know the dangers of the world, and I'd rather be safe than sorry. 2 years ago, I was alone in a huge city and walking. I got very lost, and my cell phone was at like 2% battery. I was panicking already, and because of that, I was not paying attention to my surroundings the way I should have been. I realized I was really, really lost at this point and felt instantly very uncomfortable, like I was being watched. I saw 2 men standing by a car. One got in, and it seemed like they were talking about me. It just felt very off. The car pulled away, and the other guy kept walking on the other side of the street, a little behind me. At the next block, he crossed over and said, "Hi," then asked if I had an extra cigarette. I was holding my pack and had just lit one, while quickly looking at my phone for a map before my battery died. I gave him one because I wanted him to leave me alone. He asked for a light. I gave him my lighter, and he asked if I was lost. I said no, just waiting for my husband to pick me up, and he was right around the corner, having just picked up his brother. This was a lie. I was late to meet a friend who I was meeting from an online mommy group. Have talked to this woman for years online and on FaceTime, etc. He said he would wait with me. I said that wasn't necessary, and I was walking toward the direction my husband was coming from. I frantically grabbed my phone and tried to use the Uber app just to get out of there and find my friend. I should have done that to begin with, but I wasn't planning on getting lost. Anyway, my phone died. But not before he saw I had opened the Uber app. He asked if my husband was an Uber driver or if I was just a lying bitch. I said nothing in response except, "Have a great night," and started walking faster. Then he started texting and walking faster. Ahead of us, I saw two young guys. I'm 41. They were like 21 or 22. They seemed about my daughter's age. I was relieved that there was anyone else around. I hadn't seen anyone since I got this lost, except some homeless woman trying to find cans in the trash and a kid on a bike. But then I saw them unlock a car and start walking toward it. I picked up the pace and then saw the guy that was following me was on his phone, and I saw his friend parked about half a block up across the street from us near a boarded-up building. Having no idea where I was in this city and feeling more scared about these men and why one was following me and reporting back to his friend in the car, I started to cry. I felt him getting closer and walking faster to match my pace. He was pretty close, and I heard him say, "Yeah, there's definitely not a husband. I'm not concerned. Phone died, too." I knew he was talking about me. I didn't know what to do. So I ran after the two guys, yelling, "Babe, hey babe, I'm right here." They stopped about 10 feet from the car they were getting into, and one started to say something like, "Who are you?" I would imagine. But the other one saw my face, and something clicked. He ran toward me and literally grabbed me up in a hug and said, "There you are. I can't believe I didn't notice you right behind us. I thought we lost you." Really loud. Then took my hand and pulled me toward their car. He then hugged me again like a side hug and whispered, "I hope this is okay. I felt like you needed help. Is that man bothering you?" All I could do was cry. The guy that was following me made a beeline for the car with the other guy in it and jumped in, and they ran. These nice young men called the cops and gave me a power bank and cord to charge my phone. The guy wouldn't even take it back from me. He said I should always have one, true, and I should also carry some protection. The cops took a description of the men and the car and asked if I felt safe. I did. They left. My phone was charged enough at that point to get an Uber and let my friend know I was alive, but these young men offered me a ride, but had me tell my friend and my husband, who I had just called because I was upset, who I was with. They even showed me ID and the car and plate number. On the 10-minute ride, these guys were so kind. I kept thanking them, and I tried to give them money because I was a mess for helping me. The fake husband one said that he just hoped someone would do the same for his sister or his girlfriend if they found themselves in a similar situation. I said, "More like your mom. I'm definitely old enough to be your mom. Sorry you had to fake marry me tonight." He said I was maybe old enough to be his big sister, not his mom, and that my husband was lucky to have such a beautiful wife. He was honored to be my fake husband for this short time. They ended up having drinks with me and my friend, and their girlfriends came to meet them. I told them that they had great guys and thanked them for lending them to me. Actually, we still all talk. I was 24 with a 2-year-old son whose father had relapsed on drugs and got us evicted after blowing through every dime of savings we had. Shamefully, I went back to live at my parents' house while I worked to get back on my feet. I should add they lived in an upper-middle-class neighborhood on the good side of our city and had lived there for almost 20 years at this point. The night before this incident, I was quite restless and couldn't sleep, so I went downstairs in hopes that watching murder mysteries on the living room TV would lull me to dreamland. Yes, I am that type. My father, always a worrier, double-checked all the windows, locks, and ensured the garage door was closed, as he did every night. My mother and siblings would often tease him of this, since we felt extremely safe and comfortable in that neighborhood. He went to bed, and I ended up falling asleep on the couch. I was awoken the next morning to the sounds of my father in the kitchen preparing to leave for work. I got myself and son dressed and prepared to depart for work as well. My father proceeded to head to his car in the garage and noticed that the garage door was fully opened. Frustrated, he turned to me and told me to always be sure the garage door is down. I figured he must have forgotten to check it the night before and shrugged it off. Since my parents utilized the garage to park their 2 vehicles, I had to park my car on the street at the end of a curved driveway. There was very little visibility of my car from the garage entrance. I pick up my son and head out the door to go to work. As I am approaching my car, I notice a person is sitting in the driver's seat of my vehicle. I will add that I often left my car open in case my son's now homeless father needed shelter from the rain or cold he could lay in there. Of course, I naturally think it's him. I open the passenger side door and lean in, expecting him to welcome me and beg for a ride somewhere. Instead, I see a very large and rough-looking man startle awake and stare blankly at me. In shock, I tell him to get the hell out of my car. He then tells me it's his car and to get in so he can give me a ride. Still holding my son, I start to scream at the man, who proceeded to move across the front as if to grab me. At this time, a neighbor is coming down my street in their vehicle, presumably on their way to work. I hail him down, point to the man, and tell him to call the police, which he does. I finally came to my senses, and I realized I need to get my son away from this situation, so I retreat back inside the house and wait for the cops to arrive. The man must have also come to his senses as the cops were being called too, because he ended up fleeing the car and crossing through some property to a parallel street in the neighborhood. The cops arrive and were unable to locate him, following the direction he went. They were then notified on radio that a car had just been stolen from a neighbor on that street. There's our guy. They end up locating him inside the vehicle a few miles away and apprehend him. Now, finding a strange man in your car is certainly odd, but here is where the story gets creepier. The police discovered several items on the man that were stolen from various homes in the neighborhood. They also knew him from historical arrests, including drug and rape convictions. During questioning, the man revealed he was working with 2 accomplices, and they were essentially going house to house and stealing from unlocked cars, etc. The man stated the other 2 men had split away from him, and he proceeded to get into my unlocked car where he passed out until found. Remember how the garage door was open the morning of, thus pissing my father off? I had a push-button garage opener on the visor, and the man opened the garage intending to come inside the house. The couch I was sleeping on was only 10 feet maximum from the door that led out from the house to the garage. Who knows how the events would have unfolded if he didn't pass out and made it into my house. Lesson learned. Don't date guys that need you to leave your car unlocked for shelter. This happened in January or February of 2002. I, female, had just turned 21 and was living with my father in Ohio. For context, I was extremely naive and living a pretty directionless life. I'd grown up in an affluent area of Seattle, went to private school, gone on to college, and dropped out. I was dealing with major depression, partying a lot, hanging with the wrong crowd, hooking up with random strangers. My mom didn't know what to do with me, so she sent me to live with my dad across the country in Columbus. Now, I'd been living in Ohio with my dad and pretty much lived like an entitled teenager. I did have a job in retail, but other than that, I sat around and didn't do much. My dad is an alcoholic and didn't help much. At some point, seeing him passed out in the living room one morning and working a dead-end job kind of got me wanting to return home to Seattle. My mom was unwilling to let me live with her again. I called my best friend at the time. Her mom was like my family. They didn't have a lot of money, but bought me a bus and train ticket back home. They said I could stay with them until I got back on my feet. I was relieved. My dad was sad to see me go, but he agreed to drop me off at the bus station downtown. The thing is, he had to take me before his work shift. My bus didn't leave until later in the afternoon, so I'd basically have to wait from 9 a.m. until we boarded. My dad was very nervous about leaving me there. He warned me that this station was in a rough part of Columbus. Okay, Columbus is all rough. And that I needed to be careful. I'm thinking, yeah, okay. I was totally oblivious. Dad drove me to the Greyhound station. It was surrounded by people waiting for their buses, a few stragglers outside the entrance. It was cold outside that day. Inside the bus terminal, it was pretty empty. Dad helped bring my luggage inside. 2 large suitcases containing all of my possessions. If I didn't want to be dragging them around with me all day, I had to pay to store them in a locker by the desk. I can't remember exactly how much, but I was broke and couldn't spare money for that. I looked wearily at the clock. My dad looked at me with sadness. I could tell he was worried about me traveling by myself. I hugged him and tried to look as confident as possible. We said our goodbyes, and he left. I've traveled numerous times, made several trips by plane by myself, and have traveled to various countries with groups. I was not adverse to adventure. What I was not good at doing was reading people. I genuinely saw the good in everyone and had never had a negative experience, even at 4 a.m. in downtown Seattle. If you know anything about Seattle, it has a robust public transportation system, and I was no stranger to weirdos, drunk people, and hostile exchanges between people on the bus. I'd usually just ignore people or continue walking. In this station, I felt I was totally in my element, as I'd taken public transportation many times, alone. Back to the Greyhound station. I decided to go outside and have a cigarette. The conundrum was that I had to keep an eye on my 2 suitcases. I positioned them near the front desk in such a way that I could see them clearly from the front entrance. I then head outside to get my nicotine fix. I stand off to the right of the front door. I'm smoking and trying to shuffle through my extremely cheap and very ugly purse, which contained my passport, because, I was totally irresponsible and lost my driver's license. As I'm shuffling around, a man with a large knitted hat asks me for a cigarette. I glance at him. Sure thing. I hand him one and a light. We chat briefly, and I study his face. He's not unattractive, not scary-looking, maybe a little disheveled, but I couldn't tell if he was homeless. No immediate red flags. I felt safe, as the outside of the terminal was littered with people, some smoking like me, others walking briskly to their destinations. Notably, an older gentleman is standing opposite me on the left side of the entrance. As I'm talking to Man in Hat, this older gentleman seems to be staring at me intently. Man in Hat asks where I'm from. Am I catching a bus? Comments on the cold. In passing, I casually lament that I am running low on smokes. He looks at me and says, "Oh, there's a gas station just around the corner. You can get some from there." I think this through for a moment. My bus wouldn't come for hours. I could easily grab a pack and be back in time. Something stops me, however, as I remember my luggage sitting unattended. I said I'll think about it and turned to get back inside. Hours pass, and every once in a while I would go outside to smoke. Man in Hat seems to be there every time. At one point, he mentions the gas station again. "It's just right there. I can take you." Again, I decline, and it's not because I'm scared, it's because I'm worried about my luggage. I go back inside. The last time I go outside, the street is eerily quiet. No one there. I grab another cigarette and place my purse on the ground by my feet. I look up. Man in Hat is there. He asks for money. This is where my gut finally turns and I feel uneasy. I say I don't have much and I can't help him. I hurriedly finish my cigarette as I am suddenly very aware that my purse is laying next to my feet, exposed. I lean over quickly to pick it up and mumble something about going back inside. As I raise up, Man in Hat reaches out and grabs my purse and says, "Let me help you with that." My body seems to drain itself and I immediately grab my purse closer to me. "I'm good," I say. Man in Hat suddenly switches from harmless random dude into nasty thief. "Give me the purse, you bitch," he hisses. He says it through clenched teeth like he's trying to be quiet. I'm struggling against him now, desperate as I realize no one is there to help me. I start screaming. "Help!" Man in Hat is shoving me with his hip and pushes me against a wall. "Shut the fuck up." I'm desperate now. This guy could easily pull out a knife and shank me or punch me. I cling to my purse and hope to God the cheap handles hold together. His hands are on top of mine and he shoves me again, calling me a bitch. I scream louder. From my left, I suddenly hear, "Are you okay?" Remember the older gentleman from earlier? He seemingly steps out of nowhere and loudly asks what's going on. I shove Man in Hat hard with my left thigh, and I think he realized at that moment that if he did anything to me, he could be identified. He lets go of my purse and runs off. I'm shaking and run tearfully inside, leaving older gentlemen outside. I was too frightened to say thank you. I spent the rest of that day hovering by the front desk. I was terrified. I thought of the 3-day trip ahead of me and shook with dread. I held my purse in my hands with a vice grip. When my time finally came to board the bus to the train station, I glanced in terror over the other passengers. No way I was sitting next to anyone. Every person became a potential criminal. I slumped into a seat and cowered by the window. I then heard a voice behind me. "I was going to warn you," said the voice. I whipped my head around. There was the older gentleman, casually sitting behind me. My eyes were probably as large as dinner plates. "I knew he was targeting you. You need to be more careful." I tearfully thanked him. He just stared out of the window and nodded. We didn't speak again. That moment changed my life. My struggle with Man in Hat must have only taken 30 seconds, but the repercussions lasted even 20 years later. I think back to how adamant Man in Hat was about me going around the corner to the gas station. My hair still stands on end when I think about it. Would he have robbed me over the few measly dollars in my purse? Murdered me? Raped me? Who knows? It chills my blood to think about it. I spent the next 3 days paranoid and unwilling to leave my luggage unattended. I clung to my purse and used it as a pillow on the train when laying down. When I used the restroom, I rolled my luggage into the tiny bathroom with me. I didn't sleep. I didn't eat. In chilling contrast, the train trip was quiet and uneventful. Staring out the windows as we entered Washington State, the snowfall and evergreen trees weighed down by heavy snow, I was no longer the naive and reckless young woman at the Greyhound station. I was a changed person. This happened to me in high school when I was in 11th grade. I was 16 years old. The street I lived in was in New York City, and it was a pretty small street, so you can hear anything that happens at each end. You can hear kids laughing, kids falling from bikes, etc. This is an important detail for the story. Another important detail is the house I lived in only had one front entrance to get in. The front entrance had 2 doors, a screen door, which was the first thing an outsider would see when they approached my house, and a wooden door. Both had locks, so no one can just open the screen door unless they had a key. I note this due to all the videos I watched online of people just yanking screen doors open. I was living alone for a month, and it was pretty fun and mundane. My parents were living in California at that time due to work. One day, while I was on my computer doing something, there were these strong knocks on the screen front door. I left my room and approached the front wooden door cautiously. I am an easily anxious person, and it does not help that I kept watching crime documentary videos. The person on the other side knocked on my screen door again. I peered through the peephole of the wooden door and could see this white, middle-aged dude just standing there, moving his head side to side, and his body was doing those jumpy movements that people do when they are standing and waiting. I decided to open the wooden door a little, thinking the screen front door was going to protect me anyway, and asked him, "What's wrong?" The guy instantly responded, "There's been a car crash. Please come out here and help me. A kid that was riding his bike was run over." I asked, "Where is the car crash?" The guy responded, "Down the street, over there." He pointed to one of the ends of the street. Remember how I said the street was small and I could hear anything, even a kid falling from his bike? So I sure as hell could have been able to hear a fucking car crash. The second he said that, my guard immediately went up, and while I was quite scared, I was also pissed off for some reason. "Call 911. I don't know why you're coming to me, but call 911. The guy pushed on with what he was saying before and asked me to come out to see the car crash with him and to see if there's anything we could do to help. I remember saying, "Call 911, or I'll call 911. They'll be able to handle this much better than I can." I then closed the wooden door and locked it. If you're wondering, I didn't call 911. I just went to my room and watched YouTube videos. I know, weird thing to do, but I was just trying to calm myself down because at that point my heart was beating so fast. I kept looking at the time. I forgot what specific time it was, but I remember it being in the afternoon. The sky was bright blue at least. I waited for a few hours when I was sure the guy would be gone. I went back to the front entrance and opened the wooden door, made sure no one was there, and opened the screen door to see the car crash at the end of the street. Why did I do this? I wanted to truly make sure there was no car crash. I know I said I would have heard it, but I wanted to make sure I wasn't ignoring an actual thing that I just happened to not hear. There was nothing there. No kid and no crashed car, just the usual street at the end that I'm used to. At that time, I felt a sense of relief. It's only a few years later when I thought about this moment again and realized that guy may have had some malicious intention for me. Good thing I kept myself level-headed and realized that there's no way there could have been a crash without me hearing. God knows what the fuck could have happened. Hello, little Vickies. Thanks so much for listening. I post every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday by 5 p.m. Pacific. Please subscribe if you haven't already, and hit the like button, as it's incredibly helpful to my growth here on YouTube. If you have a suggestion or just want to say hello, please leave a comment. I always reply. If you have a story of your own you'd like to share and possibly have read on the channel, send it to veronica45stories@gmail.com. Link is also in the description. Thanks again. I appreciate it more than I can say. And until next time, be good.